You remember the sound, that tinny jingle echoing down the block. You ran barefoot to the street, quarters in hand, but did you ever stop to ask, who was behind the ice cream truck? Why was the same logo everywhere? And why did it all vanish? Today, we're unpacking the untold story of Good Humor, the brand that defined summer for millions of kids in the 80s and 90s, the surprising company that owns it now, and the secret reasons it disappeared from neighborhoods across America. It's a story of nostalgia, innovation, and a quiet corporate takeover. It started in 1920 in a small candy shop in Cleveland. Harry Burt, a local confectioner, had just developed something revolutionary: vanilla ice cream on a stick dipped in chocolate. While the concept of ice cream on a stick had been pioneered earlier by Frank Epperson, who accidentally invented the popsicle. In 1905, Burt's innovation was in perfecting the product and commercializing it at scale. His son, a chemist, helped him design a way to freeze it solid so it wouldn't melt right away in your hand. This wasn't just a sweet snack, this was a delivery breakthrough. Until then, ice cream was messy, unreliable, and stuck behind soda fountain counters. Burt's invention, what we now call the ice cream bar, paired with the rise of home refrigeration, cracked open a whole new market. It meant frozen treats could now travel, and if they could travel, they could be sold anywhere. Burt didn't just popularize a dessert, he accidentally unlocked the first step toward an empire on wheels. But Burt wasn't done. He realized that to truly sell his new creation, he needed a way to bring it to people directly. So he took a Ford Model T, installed a freezer on the back, and rolled it through town like a mobile candy shop. It was a hit. So much so that by 1923, Burt secured a patent, not just for the product, but for the entire system. The treat, the delivery truck, and the uniformed driver who'd sell it. He called it Good Humor, inspired by the idea that eating well put people in a good mood. The Good Humor man wasn't just a delivery guy, he was part of the brand. Friendly, neat, and always with a smile. For the first time, frozen snacks weren't stuck in stores. They had their own soundtrack and wheels. From the very beginning, Good Humor wasn't just selling ice cream, it was selling safety. The drivers wore crisp white uniforms. The trucks were scrubbed spotless. Everything about the brand screamed clean, wholesome, and trustworthy. This was the 1920s and 30s, a time when Americans were wary of street vendors and suspicious of anything not wrapped in pristine packaging. So Good Humor leaned into the image of the all-American man in white, delivering joy to your front yard. The trucks primarily served suburban neighborhoods, which, due to the demographics of the time, were often predominantly white. This focus reflected the era's social patterns more than a deliberate brand strategy, but it helped cement Good Humor's squeaky clean image. The uniform wasn't just branding, it was strategy. By the 1950s, Good Humor had gone national. Over 2,000 trucks cruised American streets, each assigned to a specific neighborhood like a postal route. Drivers weren't just employees, they were part salesmen, part showmen. They memorized their customers' names, rang the bells at just the right hour, and even learned to perform tricks or jokes for the kids. Good Humor had turned into a summertime institution with its own rhythms and rituals. The company built training schools for drivers, enforced strict cleanliness standards, and even patented the bells that chimed from the trucks. These weren't just delivery vehicles, they were rolling performances. Ice cream had become theater, and the streets were the stage. Good Humor wasn't just popular, it became a symbol of something bigger. In post-war America, as suburbs exploded and families chased the dream of backyard barbecues and front lawn sprinklers, the Good Humor truck became part of the landscape. It was a sound of summer, a rite of passage, a treat that showed up like magic. Ads and comics from the era didn't just sell ice cream, they sold a feeling. that this was what a good childhood looked like: clean streets, smiling kids, and a white truck promising happiness in a wrapper. Good humor wasn't just feeding America, it was branding its memories, one chime at a time. As good humor trucks became a staple of American neighborhoods, others saw opportunity and moved fast. Competitors like Mr. Softy popped up with their own jingles and soft serve, while brands like Popsicle and Eskimo Pie challenged good humor in the frozen treat market. Independent operators also repainted old trucks and sold frozen treats without the corporate polish. Good humor wasn't having it. They launched lawsuits left and right, aggressively defending their patents on everything from the product to the uniforms. But the idea had escaped the lab. Even when they won in court, they couldn't stop the format from spreading. The ice cream truck had become bigger than the brand. What started as a tightly controlled delivery system was now a cultural phenomenon, copycats included. Good humor had created a movement. Now they had to protect it. To stay ahead, good humor didn't just focus on trucks, they focused on the bars themselves. These weren't random flavors. Each classic, strawberry shortcake, toasted almond, chocolate eclair, was a masterclass in product design, crunchy on the outside, creamy on the inside, and formulated to survive long hours in a freezer without turning icy. These bars weren't just delicious, they were engineered, and they stuck. Kids knew the red logo meant something good was inside, and parents trusted the consistent quality. In a growing sea of imitators, good humor had the edge because their products actually delivered. The bars weren't just snacks, they were brand ambassadors, wrapped in foil, dipped in nostalgia, and built to last. The good humor brand didn't rely on gimmicks, it relied on recognition. That red script logo with the little ice cream bar was clean, classic, and immediately trustworthy. It looked like something you could believe in, especially when it rolled into your street on a white truck. But here's the twist. Those famous jingles, they evolved over time. Early good humor trucks used hand-cranked bells to announce their arrival, a practice that began in the 1920s. By the 1950s, inspired by competitors like Mr. Softy, who popularized musical trucks, good humor adopted mechanical jingles like The Entertainer and Turkey in the Straw. Suddenly, the music wasn't just background noise, it was a Pavlovian trigger. You didn't just hear ice cream, you heard good humor. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, something strange started happening. The trucks, the jingles, the bars. They weren't just products anymore. They were memories in real time. Kids didn't just love the treats, they waited for them, chased them, and remembered them for years. The good humor truck became a fixture in childhood itself. It was a reward after Little League, a treat after the pool, a symbol that summer had truly arrived. Even parents smiled when they heard the jingle. It was more than marketing, it was emotional conditioning. By the time the 80s were in full swing, good humor wasn't just part of summer, it was summer, and that's when things really took off. The 1980s were a golden age for suburbia, and good humor cashed in. As neighborhoods expanded and more families moved out of cities, the white truck with the red logo became a standard part of the summer soundtrack. Every cul-de-sac had its regular route. Every kid knew the time it rolled through. Good humor ramped up distribution, licensed out routes, and expanded its product line to match a growing, hungry audience. Demand was high, and so was visibility. It wasn't unusual to see several trucks competing in the same neighborhood, sometimes playing overlapping jingles. It felt like a never-ending party. But behind the scenes, something had changed. Because by now, good humor wasn't really calling the shots anymore. A new owner had quietly taken the wheel. In the 1980s, everything in advertising got louder, faster, and more in your face. MTV changed the game, and good humor had to play catch-up. Gone were the slow jingles and simple posters. In came splashy commercials, bold colors, and fast-cut visuals. Good Humor leaned into this energy, tapping into pop culture wherever it could. They launched tie-ins with comic books, printed coupons that felt like collector's items, and even experimented with breakfast cereal collaborations. The goal wasn't just to sell ice cream, it was to stay relevant in a media landscape that changed by the minute. The white truck still rolled through the suburbs, but now it had competition from Saturday morning cartoons, cereal aisles, and mall food courts, and for a while, Good Humor kept pace. As the brand matured, so did its strategy. Good Humor began moving beyond trucks. Instead of just selling bars from the curb, they started licensing their name to grocery stores and gas station freezers. Suddenly, you didn't have to wait for the jingle. You could buy a Good Humor bar at the checkout line. TV commercials shifted too. Less about the truck, more about the product. Crisp shots of unwrapping, satisfying crunches, and perfect bites. The story was no longer a man in white handing treats to kids. It was about convenience, familiarity, and a taste of Americana anytime, anywhere. Good Humor became more than a truck. It became a supermarket brand. And for many families, that's how it stayed in their lives, even as the trucks began to disappear. Here's the twist most people missed. Since 1961, Good Humor hasn't been its own company at all. It was acquired by Thomas J. Lipton, a subsidiary of Unilever, the global giant behind soaps, detergents, and dozens of food brands. Unilever didn't hide the acquisition, but chose not to plaster its name across packaging. Why? Because the illusion mattered. Good Humor was nostalgic, local, and uniquely American. Slapping a multinational logo on it would break the spell. So Unilever pulled the strings quietly, focusing on building out a frozen empire, while the public still thought of Good Humor as the little truck that could. It wasn't deception. It was strategy, and it worked. Unilever wasn't just behind Good Humor. They were behind almost every freezer aisle classic. Breyers, Klondike, Magnum, even Ben and Jerry's. By the 90s, Unilever had quietly cornered the cold dessert market. Each brand kept its identity, its fan base, its look. But the supply chain? That was pure Unilever. Efficient, global, and invisible. Good Humor went from being the centerpiece to just another player in a stacked portfolio. It still had nostalgic pull, but now it shared shelf space and corporate resources with trendier, more profitable names. The red logo and classic bars survived, but the trucks, the men in white, the whole summertime magic, that didn't fit the strategy anymore. Ice cream was now a business of scale, and scale didn't need jingles. By the late 80s, the numbers just didn't add up. Selling ice cream from trucks was getting expensive, fast. Cities started regulating where trucks could stop, or insurance rates for drivers soared, gas prices went up, and meanwhile, supermarkets were thriving. Why send out a driver with 500 bars when you could ship 50,000 to a regional warehouse and have them on shelves in hours? Consumer habits were changing too. Parents were working more, kids were indoors more, and neighborhoods didn't have the same rhythms. Convenience beat ritual. And slowly, quietly, the magic of the truck started to look like a logistical headache. The trucks were still out there, but now they were fighting the tide, and the tide was moving fast toward retail. The writing was on the wall. By the late 1970s, Good Humor began phasing out its company-owned truck fleet, a process that continued into the 1980s. The iconic white trucks with the red lettering were no longer part of the official business model. They licensed routes to independents, let local operators keep things going, and focused on packaged bars and freezer aisle growth. For a while, the illusion held. The trucks still rang their bells, still handed out strawberry shortcakes to smiling kids. But the momentum was gone. There was no central push, no national marketing, no reinvestment to meet the times. One by one, the trucks disappeared, not with a bang, but with silence. A summer soundtrack fading out, not because we stopped loving it, but because the business moved on. Even as the trucks vanished from streets, something strange happened. People never forgot the sound, that jingle, those bells. It became more than advertising. It became emotional shorthand for summer, for childhood, for something safe and sweet. You hear it in movies, in comedy sets, and fashion inspired by retro suburban life. Entire generations carry the memory of running toward that sound, barefoot, quarters clutched in hand. Even people who didn't grow up with good humor trucks still know the rhythm. It lives on as a kind of cultural ghost, echoing in block parties, memes, and stories parents tell their kids. The trucks may have faded, but the brand lodged itself deep in the American brain. And it's still playing that tune, quietly in the background. By the 90s, a darker mood was setting in. News stories about child abductions and stranger danger rewired how parents thought about street life. Suddenly, a truck driven by a stranger wasn't charming. It was a potential threat. Cities passed new zoning laws. Neighborhoods became more car-centric, and those perfect grid routes turned into cul-de-sacs and shopping malls. It wasn't just harder to hear the jingle, it was harder to legally drive the truck. Add in lawsuits over accidents, strict insurance requirements, and general suburban sprawl, and the writing was on the wall. The world had changed. The culture that made good humor iconic no longer made space for it, and no marketing campaign could fix that. As the trucks struggled, freezer aisles exploded. By the mid-90s, convenience was king, and grocery stores became the new battleground for dessert. Why wait for a truck that might never come when you could grab a box of strawberry shortcake bars at Walmart or 7-Eleven? Good humor pivoted hard, shifting its identity from an experience to a product. No more music, no more drivers, just packaging and price points. The brand that once roamed the streets now sat quietly behind a frosty glass door. And for many, that was enough. It still tasted the same. It still brought back memories, but something had been lost in the transition. The magic wasn't in the bar. It had always been in the moment. Talk to anyone who drove a good humor truck back in the day, and you'll hear the same thing. It wasn't just a job. It was a relationship. Drivers knew every kid's favorite bar, remembered birthdays, sometimes even handed out free ones when a game was won or a tooth was lost. They weren't just selling ice cream. They were stitching together communities, one driveway at a time. And then, one summer, they were just gone. No farewell tour, no big announcement, just silence, like someone turning off the soundtrack to childhood. What was once a symbol of connection became a fading photo in a family album. It wasn't just ice cream that disappeared, it was a whole rhythm of life. Today, good humor is still around, but primarily as a product in freezers. You won't find official good humor trucks anymore. No jingles, no uniforms, no bells. Just bars wrapped in plastic, sitting quietly in convenience stores or grocery aisles. Unilever occasionally leverages the brand's nostalgia with limited edition releases or marketing campaigns tied to retro themes. In some regions, independent operators even license the good humor name for local events or festivals. The website is clean, nostalgic, and filled with frozen options, but it's missing the spirit that once defined the brand. For Unilever, good humor is just another SKU in a vast frozen portfolio. Profitable? Sure. Memorable? Yes. But alive? Not really. What once moved, literally and emotionally, now sits still, waiting, hoping someone remembers that it used to ring. But just when it seemed like good humor had melted into history, something surprising happened. Nostalgia brought it back. Not with trucks, but with t-shirts, memes, fan art, and vintage bar wrappers posted on Instagram. Shows like Stranger Things turned retro suburban life into an aesthetic. And with it came the sound of jingles, the sight of red logos and freezer treats that once ruled the block. Gen X and millennials, kids who chase the truck barefoot, are now parents themselves. They search eBay for vintage good humor gear. They tweet about the songs. They post pixelated photos of childhood summers that felt endless. Good humor isn't back on the streets, but in hearts, memories, and online archives, it's never really left. Unilever didn't buy good humor to tell stories. They bought it to move product, and today their focus is global scale, not sentimental branding. They're optimizing distribution, running freezer logistics across dozens of countries, and rolling out new SKUs for whatever market shows growth. Good humor in that world is a legacy brand. It sits quietly in their portfolio, profitable but unremarkable. There's no push for innovation, no big marketing splash, no attempt to reinvent the brand for a new generation. It still sells because nostalgia sells, but it doesn't lead. It's a remnant, not a priority. And that's what makes the silence around its disappearance so strange. It wasn't killed off. It was simply left behind. But just because the corporation moved on doesn't mean everyone did. Across the country, a small but devoted group of independent owners have revived the good humor truck experience. Unofficially, some buy vintage trucks and restore them down to the white paint and hand-cranked bells. Others recreate the look from scratch and hit neighborhood festivals or retro pop-ups, bringing back the magic for a weekend or a summer. These aren't big operations. They're labors of love. One truck shows that chase nostalgia, not margins. And people show up, they line up with their kids, tell old stories, take photos, and for a few minutes it feels like the 80s again. It's not a comeback, but it's something close to a heartbeat. And then there's the Jingle. Somehow it survived everything. There's the regulation battles, the corporate handoff, the retail takeover. It's still out there. Newer trucks not tied to good humor still play the same handful of melodies. Turkey in the Straw, The Entertainer, Pop Goes the Weasel. Sometimes they're digital, looped endlessly from a speaker, slightly out of tune. But the effect is the same. Even kids who've never seen a real good humor truck react when they hear it. They stop, they smile, they know something good is coming, even if they don't know why. That's the strange power of branding done right. It becomes muscle memory, a sound that rewires your brain long after the original brand has left the building. In the end, good humor might not just be a memory. It might be a model. Long before experiential marketing was a buzzword, good humor was already doing it. It was about more than product. It was about presence. The uniform, the jingle, the truck, the routine. It created anticipation, interaction, ritual. And in a world where brands now scramble to feel real, it turns out good humor was doing authenticity before it was trendy. It wasn't just ice cream, it was a full sensory experience. The modern marketing playbook is filled with ideas that good humor nailed by accident decades ago, and now we're starting to realize that maybe it wasn't just quaint. It was ahead of its time. Looking back, the good humor story is a case study in both brilliance and blind spots. What worked was simple: a consistent product, a joyful experience, and a direct connection to the customer. They built trust, routine, and community all on four wheels. But what didn't work was the failure to adapt. As culture shifted, as delivery models evolved, good humor stayed parked in the past. It never embraced digital. It never reimagined its identity for a new era. And so it slipped away, not because people stopped loving it, but because it stopped evolving. Longevity doesn't just mean surviving the years. It means growing with them. And that's the lesson good humor left behind. There was no big scandal, no public meltdown, no dramatic rebrand. Good Humor didn't crash. It coasted to a stop. Logistics changed. Suburbs changed. Parent companies shifted focus. And the brand, still loved, was gradually repackaged and shelved. But here's the twist. Because it didn't go out in flames, it went deeper. It became myth. A fading jingle in the heat, a logo that flashes across your brain when you see a certain shade of red. The quiet fade is what made it powerful, and it wasn't taken from us. We just woke up one summer and realized it was gone, and in that absence, it became immortal. This isn't just a story about ice cream. It's about how a simple sound, a small truck, and a frozen treat could define an entire season of life. Good Humor captured something fragile, joy that came without planning, without screens, without effort. Just a bell, a run down the driveway, a smile, and even now, decades later, people still remember that chase. The sunburned pavement, the sticky fingers, the thrill of being first in line. What we lost wasn't just a brand, it was a feeling. And what we remember isn't just a taste. It's the moment it arrived, like magic, right when we needed it most. The Good Humor truck wasn't just delivering ice cream, it delivered a moment of freedom, joy, and shared experience. And while the trucks may be gone, their legacy rolls on in every sticky memory, every sun-baked afternoon where kids chased that fading jingle. The brand may have melted into the corporate machine, but what it gave us, that's frozen in time. And maybe that's what made Good Humor so special. It didn't just sell ice cream. It sold a feeling, a little thrill that showed up right when summer felt endless. If this brought back a memory or even just made you smile, consider subscribing. I've got more strange, true stories just like this one, and I'd love to hear yours. What's one sound from your childhood that instantly takes you back? Drop it in the comments. And if you think this story was wild, wait until you hear what Colgate tried to do in the 1980s. Yes, Colgate. With frozen lasagna, you can watch that one right here.